Shall we all be upstanding as we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for this morning. We thank you for bringing all of us from our various homes to this place this morning. We know that once you have brought us here, you are going to help us and guide us through this program. We pray for your power of wisdom to be given to those who are going to present to us this morning, and for all of us gathered here to have the understanding that is needed for us to appreciate the work that has been done. Once we have started with you, we know that you are going to continue with us until we bring this program to a successful end. We know that once we have prayed, we have heard, and the answer will surely come. In the mighty name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Hello. Is this better? Okay. So we'll acknowledge a few partners and stakeholders with us this morning. For the high table, I'm sure as time goes on, we'll get to know them because of the role they will play. So I would start with acknowledging the NSAC members with us this morning. Welcome. We also have reps from the Ministry of Transport, Education, Prison Service, and also the media for always being on hand to carry our message to the general public. We also have some development partners with us. I see ONS with us. To welcome us and introduce our chair for this morning's function, I'll call Mr. Bright Mensah, coordinator of the AHIES, of AHIES, to do the introductions for us, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Board member of the Governing Board of Ghana Statistical Service, Professor Josephine Jani, the government statistician, directors of GSS, development partners, representatives of the various MMDAs, our friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. It gives me much pleasure to welcome you this morning to this special event. As you all know, Statistical Service, we mandated to produce, collect, compile, and disseminate statistical data for policy making. Now, this morning we are gathered here to officially release the third quarter of the annual income, household income and expenditure survey, which we call AHIES. Now, the AHIES is the first nationally representative high-frequency household panel survey that is being conducted by Statistical Service, and is expected to run consecutively for 3 years. So the first round started in 1st of January 2002. We'll finish the first round, and which ended February 13th, 2022. We are in the second stage of the second round. So this morning we are here to give you statistics from the third quarter of the annual income and household survey. So once again, I want to welcome all of you to this event. We look forward to receiving your questions, and hopefully I answer them to your satisfaction. I have a dual role, so I'll move on to do the second responsibility, and that is introduce the chair for this occasion. And the chairperson for this occasion is a man that we owe tremendous thanks to for accepting to chair this release amidst his busy schedule. He holds a master's degree from the University of Dortmund, Germany, and the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, and a professional law license from the Ghana Bar Association. He has held many managerial positions in consulting and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, where he became, among others, the manager for Care International. He was a team leader for Community Empowerment Association, CEA, a consultancy firm based in Kumasi, where he worked with several governmental and non-governmental organizations. Our chairperson is a member of parliament for Himan Lower Denchira constituency in the Central Region, and a member of the Trade, Industry, Tourism Committee, and Local Government and Rural Development Committee in Parliament. Our chairperson is the Honorable Deputy Minister for Employment and Labor Relations. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, shall we welcome Honorable Bright Reku Grobo.
Board members of the Ghana Statistical Service, the government statistician, directors of the MDAs herein present, development partners, including representation from the ILO, members of the National Statistics Advisory Committee, distinguished invited guests, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. This assignment was originally for the Minister of Employment and Labor Relations, for all the good reasons. I'm standing in for him because there's an emergency cabinet meeting. But trust that it is not a task that I cannot handle. So don't worry. I will sit in for him for us to do this till the end. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be invited to chair this special occasion of the release of the quarterly reports of the 2022 Annual Household Income and Expenditure Survey. I wish to express government's profound gratitude to the board and staff of the Ghana Statistical Service for their continuous production of quality, reliable, robust, and timely data to inform public and private policy decision-making and research. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a minister responsible for employment, labor relations, and pensions, I have a direct and indirect interest in quarterly data on employment and labor-related surveys. This is because of the ministry's mandate to ensure decent work for all workers in Ghana and Ghanaian workers abroad. The decent work agenda encompasses employment creation, social protection, rights at work, and social dialogue. These pillars of the decent work agenda can only be improved upon by the timely production of reliable labor and employment-related statistics. Such data is crucial if the country wants to enhance working conditions of workers while promoting wealth creation and food security for national development. The production of data for policy decision-making is in tandem with the country's aim of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, such as no poverty, zero hunger, decent work, and economic growth. Such data also aligns with the focus of the African Agenda 2063, as well as government's medium-term National Development Policy Framework, which is titled Coordinated Program of Economic and Social Development Policies 2017 to 2024, an agenda for jobs, creating prosperity and equal opportunity for all. Ladies and gentlemen, you will also agree with me that the publication, sensitization on and usage of various statistical products of the Ghana Statistical Service will enhance both the public and private assessment of government socioeconomic interventions. It is my hope that all stakeholders continuously support and collaborate with the Ghana Statistical Service in the discharge of their national mandate of producing and disseminating official statistics. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's for this reason that I accept without any reservation to be the chairperson for the release and dissemination of these reports. I would need your cooperation so that we bring this to a successful end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for accepting to chair today's function. Now, we go to the main reason for which we are here today, the presentation on the Ghana 2022 Annual Household and Income and Expenditure Survey, third quarter labor statistics report. And to do us the honors, we'll call on our government statistician, Prof. Samuel Kobna Enim, to take us through.
It's okay. If my name is okay, put it off. Honorable Deputy Minister, colleagues on the high table, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. At GSS, we always want our feedback once we say good morning. Good morning once again. Good morning. Honorable Minister, let me put this presentation in a context. So in the next 45 minutes, I would walk you through the report that we're going to launch today. But it's important we have this in the broader context. And the context is that, Honorable Deputy Minister, this year we've released a report on earnings inequalities in Ghana. So we want this report on labor statistics to be looked at in the context of the earnings inequality report. We've also initiated conversations with the United Nations Development Program on issues related to work. And we've also initiated conversations with the International Labour Organization in relation to labor productivity. Why I'm bringing this up is the need for us to look at statistics, not in silos, but a holistic intervention. So this report that we're going to launch today, it is important that we look at it in the context of, as I said, the earnings inequality report that we've already released and we've institutionalized to release that report going forward, and also the upcoming work with the International Labour Organization on labor productivity, and also the United Nations Development Program, the conversation that we've started having in the area of work. And this is the only way we can, in my mind or in the mind of management and the Board of Ghana Statistical Service, tackle the issue of labor holistically. The second thing that I want to do, and I'm bringing all this up because I like your submission in terms of your speech, which touched on my background, so it's giving me this time to talk about two other issues. The other thing, Honorable Deputy Minister, I want us to keep in mind is the need for us to change the narrative on labor statistics. I am convinced that everybody here, once we talk about labor statistics, the person will be thinking in the light of what is unemployment rate, what is employment rate. And from our point of view, that is not helping us tackle issues of labor-related issues more aggressively as a country. So what I'm going to do is to initiate the conversation to help us move away from focusing on only unemployment issues when it comes to labor statistics. One of the things that we do with this annual household income and expenditure survey is not just a matter of fact that it's a high-frequency data. Honorable Deputy Minister, colleagues, we are following the same households every quarter. So one of the things that we're going to highlight in this presentation is what we call labor mobilities. So it's going to give us a better understanding to appreciate how people are moving across different sectors of the economy and help us understand how people are moving across different economic activity status. And the last thing that we're going to touch on, which also is helping to change the narrative on labor statistics, is what we are calling the triple burden. Because we believe that it is not only employment challenges that households are faced. Households are faced with multiple socioeconomic challenges. So it's important to identify households that are unemployed, individuals that are unemployed, and are also simultaneously food insecure and multidimensionally poor. So these are the two areas that we are adding to the conversation on labor statistics, as I said, to help us move the narrative away from what is unemployment rate and jubilate anytime as a country when it drops by 0.1%, 0.2%. That personally, I don't know what it means for us. But when we know how people move, it gets us to better understand how we're going to target them properly. As you rightly indicated, this annual household income and expenditure survey has been crafted, is being pursued following our own coordinated program of economic and social development policies. And the title for that program, as you rightly indicated, is Agenda for Jobs. So it hit directly to what we are talking about today. And also the Sustainable Development Goal 8 focuses on two things which you touched on. One has to do with full and potential employment, and the second part is what you talked about, which has to do with decent work. So one of the things that we're going to highlight here has to do with people that we are calling vulnerable groups, given the characteristics of the jobs that they do. And secondly, we look at vulnerability from the perspective of their movement in and out of different economic status. Primarily, the annual household income and expenditure survey, it's a survey that the Ghana Statistical Service pursues with the aim of rebasing the gross domestic product. But because we wanted to change the narrative, we added two modules to it. One has to do with how we can track poverty over time following the same households, and the other is to help us estimate our monetary and non-monetary poverty. So in our last release that set out the first quarter of the annual household income and expenditure survey, we had two complementary reports that had to do with the multidimensional poverty report and the food insecurity report. This time around, we have three reports done, but we want to put emphasis on labor statistics. That is why this release is focusing on labor statistics. As I indicated, the other added value of the annual household income and expenditure survey is the issue of labor mobilities. And I'm going to explain this in a short while. And fifthly, what the annual household income and expenditure survey would help us to do is to track multiple burdens, that is either double burden, food insecure unemployment, multidimensionally poor food insecure, multidimensionally poor unemployed. These are double burdened households, and triple burdened households, as I indicated, are those that are unemployed, food insecure, and multidimensionally poor. So these are the objectives for the annual household income and expenditure survey. For purposes of clarity, let me provide some very quick definitions so that we put this conversation in its right context. So labor force, previously we tagged it as economically active population. So if you look at our 2015 labor force survey, you see the terminology economically active population. But with revisions based on the ILO, now they put emphasis more on the labor force, which is simply looking at, of your population 15 years and older, what are those that are employed and those that are unemployed? The second part is what we are pushing for to contribute to the change in the narrative, that is vulnerable employment. So if you look at our releases since the census, since the 2015 Labor Force Survey, 2017 Ghana Living Standard Survey, and indeed in our coordinated program, reference is made to the fact that we have vulnerable employment in this country constituting about 67%. Honorable Deputy Minister, I'm going to put emphasis on these numbers so that we'll ask questions as in, are these numbers changing over time? So if you go into our coordinated program, you see that as at the time they were drafting it in 2018, reference was made to statistics from 2013 that acknowledge the fact that people who are doing vulnerable employment, simply defined as self-employed people without any employees, simply defined as those doing contributing family work. So these are essentially people that do not have either verbal or written contracts around the work that they do. So it tells you the likelihood of they exiting that particular type of employment. And that is why we tag them vulnerable employment. And we'll get to know shortly that we're still hovering around 67% for vulnerable employment. One of the reasons why we would continue to oblige in the release of unemployment rate, from our point of view, is to be consistent with international standards. But we want to emphasize that the international standards do not exactly fit our informal economy. The international standards for the definition of employment is that over the reference period, in this case, 7 days before we did the interview, did you work for 1 hour? Did you work for pay or profit? Once you did that work for 1 hour, it was for pay for profit, you get into the employment category and the conversation ends. So you don't get into the unemployment category even if the work was just for 1 hour. So you're out of it. So ILO would define it as persons unemployed as persons who are available and looking for work. But once you work for 1 hour, you don't get into that basket of unemployment. And that is why we need to put a conversation on how our structure of the economy would help us define some particular statistics to address the vulnerable employment that we have in the economy. Then what we're going to see here, given that we are collecting a panel data, is what we are calling the unemployment spell. So the unemployment spell is simply persons in Ghana who have had an uninterrupted period of getting out of unemployment. So persistently, they've remained in unemployment. Within our reference period, that is in the 3 quarters of 2022, these people had uninterrupted experience with unemployment. So over the 3 quarters in 2022, that's the first 3 quarters in 2022, they remained unemployed. Labor mobility, simply telling us over time, that is across the 3 quarters, how people move across different economic status, and even if they are employed, different categories of employment, i.e. formal employment, informal employment, and across our different sectors. This is important to appreciate the vulnerability of even persons who are employed. So if we give a statistic that 66% of our population are employed, and you don't appreciate the mobility of these persons, you treat them as people who can get the minimum wage. But for all you know, these people are moving in and out of employment. And that is what we want to discuss when it comes to labor mobility. 2 things that we thought is important for clarification. We did indicate that this has given us an opportunity to follow the same people over time. So I'm going to, in a short while, show you the number of households that we visited. Conscious effort has been made to follow these households over time. And as was indicated by the coordinator, going into the whole 2023 and 2024, we look forward in following these same households and following these individuals. That is the only way we can capture labor mobility. But you all would agree with me that reasons such as migration and other reasons will not enable us follow exactly the same people over time. So once you have the opportunity to get information on all your respondents over the entire period, in this case, the first 3 quarters of 2022, then you say you have a balanced data. Means what you started with, you've gone through with them over all the 3 quarters. But if some drop out and you have to add some over the period, we call it a data that is not balanced. So we've used both data sets in this analysis to achieve the different objectives that we want to have. The methodology, the coordinator quickly went through it. It's a quarterly household panel survey. Panel survey simply means that we are following the same people over time. It's representative at the national, regional, urban, rural level. we use the 2021 population housing census to get weights for the sample that we worked with. That is why in the table on the right-hand side, you see that we have the weighted sample that grosses up our sample to the national level. So from the 2021 population housing census, the population 15 years and older is around 19 million, and that is exactly what we are getting from the annual household income and expenditure survey. With digital modes of data collection, we are using the computer-assisted personal interviewing approach. As I said, our age cutoff is 15 years and older, and questions related to labor were 7 days preceding the interview. First highlight. Throughout the 3 quarters of 2022, consistently, we have found about 11 million of our population employed. Throughout the 3 quarters of 2022, consistently we found about 1.73, 1.76 of our population that are unemployed. And from the perspective of those outside the labor force, we found about 5.87 to 6.51, ranging between these two figures over time. So this is the statistics that we all know. And let's carefully keep that in mind, because we are talking about 11 million people that across the 3 quarters, at any point in time, we find that they are employed. About 1.73 to 1.76 people that consistently we find them as not employed over the 3 quarters. Now we change the narrative to vulnerable employment. The definition for vulnerable employment is simply, are you self-employed without employees? Are you a contributing family worker? And as I indicated, the figure is still hovering around 2 out of every 3 persons that are employed being in vulnerable employment. We see this skewed towards females, and it's skewed towards female to the extent that we find about a 21 percentage point between males and females. So although we are talking about 11 million of our population that at any point in time they are employed, those who are working by themselves, own account workers, and those who are contributing family workers, largely they do not have any forms of contract binding what they do. It's about 2/3 of that. Then we find female dominating among those who are vulnerably employed with a percentage point difference of about 21%. So this is the headline figure that we've always worked with when we come to unemployment, whether it's 13.4, 13.7, 13.9. And as I indicated, we are always concerned about this figure. We didn't deviate from what we know from the census in terms of what our unemployment rate is. During the 2021 population and housing census, we got an unemployment rate of 13.4. And throughout the 3 quarters that we followed the same households, we still have figures in the region of 13.4 and 13.9, depicting the unemployment rate that we have in Ghana. Consistent with our censuses and our surveys, we've seen this as predominantly an urban phenomenon. Honorable Deputy Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let's slow down the conversation on that, and now let's begin to think about what is happening to whether somebody is employed or somebody is not employed. The benefit that you get from following the same people. So we took our third quarter data, and look at those who were unemployed, and went back to the first quarter and looked at what they were doing in the first quarter, and find out whether the characteristics of what they were doing in the first quarter made them susceptible to unemployment in the third quarter. And what we saw is that in the first quarter of 2022, those who were unemployed in the third quarter, about 2/3 of them were in vulnerable employment. And this goes back to emphasize the point that it's the characteristics of what they do that is what we need to pay emphasis on rather than the rate. So those who were unemployed in the third quarter, go back to the first quarter, find out what they are doing, and what they were doing in the first quarter were activities that we characterize as vulnerable employment. Specifically those who are in non-agri self-employed without employees, about 1/3 of it, agricultural contributing worker, about 17% of that. That alone is taking about 50% of those who were employed in the first quarter but were doing vulnerable work And for that reason, in the third quarter, they became unemployed. Another thing that we want to change the narrative on is our youth that are not doing the three things that we expect them to do. We expect our youth to either be in school, education, either education, training, or employment. And about a fifth of our youth are not doing any of these. 15 to 35 years. They are not in employment, they are not in education, and they are not in training. We call it the NEET. Not in education, not in employment, and not in training. Honorable Deputy Minister, our goal as Statistical Service is to point policymakers to what we think or how we think they need to target these issues. So it is not just the fact that we put out a statistics that about a quarter of our youth are unemployed. We're providing further information on where you can maximize your gains if you decide to deal with it. So we interrogate the data and tell the policymaker that it peaks at age 21. So most of our youth at age 21, that is where you don't find them doing any of these three things. And that is where you can maximize your returns, rather than targeting the age bracket 30 to 35. So what we show here is that the not in employment, education, and training reduces by age. So once you go from age 15 to age 35, the number of people who are not in employment, education, and training reduces. So if you really want to maximize your gains in addressing the issue, then target age 21. And if you think about this carefully, it coincides with the transition from school to work. It coincides with the number of transitions that we have as a country. So it's pretty easy for the policymaker to target this age bracket and make the necessary returns. I turn over to the labor mobilities. We do a number of analysis, one among those who are employed, and see what the movements are. Keeping in mind what our development trajectory is. And colleagues, all of you would agree with me that our development trajectory is to make Ghana an industrialized country. So we want to look at labor mobilities across different sectors and see whether the agric is absorbing more people, services are absorbing more people, or industry is absorbing more people. So we look at people who are moving from the industry sector to the services sector, moving from the industry sector to the agricultural sector, and vice versa. What we see is that we see a lot more people moving out of the industry sector. Specifically, we see about 96,939 persons moving from the industry sector to the agricultural sector. And we also see another 120,018 people moving from the industry sector to the agricultural sector. If you put these two figures together, you have in excess 216,000 people that are moving out of the industry sector to either the agricultural sector or the services sector. The reverse is not the case of people moving from the services sector to either industry or agric, and from agric to either industry or services. This really calls for a reflection of our industrialization agenda, given that we are losing people from the industry sector to the agric and the services sector. So in the report, we say that agric makes a net gain of 54,000 from the industry and services sector. And the services makes a net gain of 38,000. So they are absorbing people from the industry sectors. So these are the two sectors that are making the gains. And this calls for our careful attention. Honorable Deputy Minister, we look at what is happening to formal employment, informal employment. I did indicate at the start of my presentation the need to contextualize the statistics that we produce. So we look at transitions from the formal sector to unemployment and transitions from the informal sector to unemployment. Consistent with our expectation, the transition from the informal sector to unemployment on the average is 5 times that of the formal sector. So until we regularize things in the formal sector, if we continue to remain in the informal sector, it continues to expose the fragilities that our employed people are having. So on the average, we are seeing about 5 times difference between transitioning from informal sector to unemployment relative to from formal sector to unemployment. Another reflection that we thought should attract policy's attention is, if you look at persons who were employed in the first quarter, and in the second quarter and the third quarters, they became unemployed. They lost their jobs. What is the sectorial share of these people from the first quarter? Honorable Deputy Minister, again, this doesn't come as a surprise. We do acknowledge the fact that the services sector absorbs quite a number of those who are employed. But for the services sector to be containing about 57% of those who became unemployed, it clearly is pointing us to the characterization of our services sector, which you all know that it's mainly trade and retail for that matter, pointing to the vulnerabilities that is associated with the services sector. So it contributed 57.7% specifically, and followed by agricultural sector 21.4% and the industry sector 20.9%. This attests to the fact that the only way to our sustained and steady growth path is what we've identified, which is industrialization, because of the robustness associated with it. We look at labor mobilities across the three quarters and from the three economic activity status point of view. So the first economic activity status is those who are unemployed. The way we want you to appreciate this is that put all those who are employed together in quarter one. So in quarter one, we see that about 10.79 million people were employed. I remember very well that in the first chart, I did indicate that it hovers around 11 million. The change is occurring because here we are using the balance panel. What that means is that we should find people that we spoke to them in quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. What we shared earlier on had to do with the unbalanced panel. That is why we saw the figure of 11 million. Here we are seeing the 10.79 million because we went to quarter three, find out those who were there, and trace it back to quarter one, so that we can follow those people over the three quarters. Honorable Deputy Minister, what we emphasize is the 7.5 million people that were consistently employed across the three quarters. So the first statistic that we put out there was that at any point in time, you have 11 million people who are employed. The related statistic that we are putting here is that if you look at those who were consistently employed across the three quarters, you have 7.5 million people. Honorable Minister, this is what this is telling us. 3.5 million people moving in and out of the different economic status, either from employed to unemployed, from employed to outside the labor force. This exposes the vulnerabilities that we claim that 11 million people are employed. We drill down and find out those who are employed in the first quarter, employed in the second quarter, but in the third quarter ended up being unemployed. And we have 20,000 persons that sustained their employment in the first and the second quarter of 2022, but ended up being unemployed in the third quarter of 2022. Then another group of people, about 90,000 of them, who were employed in the first quarter, but in the second and third quarters of 2022, they remain unemployed. This is the narrative that we want to change, rather than unemployment rate being 13.4, 13.7. We need to follow these 90,000 people, these 320,000 people, and find out what is happening to them. These 3.5 million people who were employed in the first quarter, but moved in and out of different economic status in the second quarter and in the third quarter. We do the same analysis from the unemployed perspective. So again, you do recall that we said in the third quarter, about 1.76 million people were unemployed. And emphasize the fact that over the three quarters, at any point in time, you find about 1.7, 1.8 million people who are unemployed. If you use the balance panel, you get a figure of 1.64. The same analogy. You go to your third quarter and you trace back. So the figure slightly drops from 1.76 to 1.64 for the first quarter. And find out people who were unemployed in the first quarter, unemployed in the second quarter, and unemployed in the third quarter. Honorable Deputy Minister, this is the group of people that we call unemployment spell. And we have 160,000 people who have remained in that unemployed status across all the 3 quarters. I always tell my colleagues, Honorable Deputy Minister, that these people, they know they are down, so they wouldn't worry. My worry is those who were unemployed in the first quarter, became employed in the second quarter, and returned to unemployment in the third quarter. So you see 1.64 million people not employed, 520,000 of them gain employment in the second quarter, and we have 110,000 of them losing their jobs. That is a fifth of them losing their jobs in the third quarters. This in and out of unemployment could be more damaging to people than persons who consistently, they know they need to find coping mechanisms to keep whatever status they have. The third mobility is those who are outside the labor force. Again, the same argument. You have 5.57 people who are outside the labor force. 1.23 million of them gained employment in the second quarter. And of this, 410,000 went out of the labor force again in the third quarter. And you have about another 100,000 of them being unemployed in the third quarter. Mobilities. People going in and out of different labor status. Honorable Deputy Minister and colleagues, on the outside the labor force, what I want to emphasize are what are those people outside the labor force? It's pretty straightforward if people get out of the labor force to pursue higher education and get better jobs. But another area that we need to look at carefully is those who worked but are not employed. They did some form of work, either theirs or for somebody else, but did not attract any pay or profit. And this group constitutes about a quarter of those who are outside the labor force. Definitely we need to have interventions for these people and find out what kinds of work they are doing and whether it's volunteerism and it's something that as a country we need to tag on to and see how we can use that to prepare people for the labor market. The third area of the presentation, the multiple burdens. As I indicated, across the 3 quarters, we sought to find out those who were food insecure, those who were multidimensionally poor, and those who were unemployed. We keep an emphasis on the changes in the numbers. In the first quarter, we identified about 384,000 persons that were triple burdened. This figure dropped significantly by about 78,000 persons in the second quarter. We saw this number rebounding back to in excess of 360,000 in the third quarter. So we make gains between the first quarter and the second quarter by getting 78,000 people out of the triple burden category, and we make losses between the second quarter and the third quarter. The key question is this being driven by policy or this is being driven by seasonalities? And that is what we think that going forward, we're going to get a better understanding following the same cohort of people over time. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would want to end my presentation with some key messages. At any point in time, 1.7 million persons are unemployed in Ghana. These are predominantly female, specifically 2 out of every 3. For the first time, we've given out the unemployment spell in Ghana, and close to 160,000 persons have consistently remained unemployed in the first 3 quarters of 2022. As we indicated, at any point in time, we have 11 million people who are unemployed. But if you really want to find out those who are employed, if you want to find out those who are consistently employed, you get 7.5 million. What this tells us that 3.5 million people that ordinarily will say they are employed would always move in and out of employment, making them very vulnerable. Our status for vulnerable employment has not changed. Since 2013, 10 years on, we still have 2 out of every 3 persons who are unemployed. And if you trace why people become unemployed, you find out that about 2/3 of them are those who are in vulnerable employment. We really need to get out of the informal status that we find ourselves, because on the average, it's contributing about 5 times more to unemployment than formal employment. And finally, the gains that we made between Q1 and Q2 by getting 78,000 people out of the multiple burden category, it was reversed significantly by getting 55,000 people back, meaning that we made a gain of just 23,000 persons between the first and the third quarters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I think you'd all agree with me that today we've learned something new. And there's a lot for us to do if we want to be industrialized as a nation. Our youth are supposed to be in 3 categories: either be employed, educated, be in education, or in training. But we realize, especially those around age 21, are not doing any of these. So it's up to us and policymakers to see what we can do and how best we can solve some of these issues. It's now time for our question and answers. I know we all have things nagging at us, and we want to get a clearer picture. So the floor is opened, and your questions, contributions are welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I want to commend the government statistician for that eloquent presentation. My first concern is we've been accused of promoting child labor. I want to find out why the survey considered 15-year-olds and not 15-year-olds and not 18-year-olds. Secondly, if in the second quarter, if in the second quarter people got job in the second quarter, and by the third quarter, they're out of job, what was the nature of the job?
Please give us your name and
Thank you
your
very
institution.
much. My name is Winston Taki. I'm a business TV presenter with Metro TV. Thank you for this important data. I have with time observed the terrain of a lot of talent or youth desiring to migrate to other countries because of the economic challenges. Based on the data that was presented, I got to observe that a lot of the people moving from industry, which consistently government have made it a policy to prioritize industrialization. Does that mean that the whole concept of industrialization through the National Development Planning Committee has not well been implemented to ensure that the various age groups are factored, are considered in the design of the policy to ensure there is sustainability in that regard. Because if the future of the nation is built on policy that are owned by the citizens, then certainly we can know that in the next 10 years or 5 years or 15 years, we have a destination. Policies upon policies from different governments have not yielded the result that we desire. Therefore, the train of our destination looks a bit blurred. My key question is, at the age of 21, the kind of job quality that you said, probably education, employment, and all the attainment that a youth would desire, would it be qualitative enough to determine whether they can sustain themselves at that age? Thank you very much.
Kingsley, Ghanaian Times. I want to find out from Prof of the 1.76 million who were unemployed in the third quarter, what accounted for that? Can you give us explanation? Were they sacked from their employment? What was it? Thank you.
My name is Issa Mohammed from the Ghana News Agency. From the number of people who were employed, say in the first quarter and by the third quarter were out of jobs, how many of them were on government interventions? If you could look at it to tell us. Let's say NAPCO or what the likes, what have you. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Mine is on the mobility. I think you said the net gain in the agri sector was about 120,000 as against the industry. I want to find out what are the factors? Is there a pull factor that is pulling them from industry, or there's a push factor that is pushing them out of industry? Because I know government have this aggressive industrialization, which is pursuing one district one factory. So if with all this, people are moving from the industry to the agri sector, then I don't know. We need to find out what is the issue. Is it that planting for food and jobs in the agri sector is working very well, that it's attracting people from industry? So I don't know if we can tell us much. We need to know. I mean, it will help policymakers anyway, because if you have such investment in industry and at the end of the day, people are still moving from industry to the agri sector, then there's an issue. Thank you.
Okay, we'll let Prof address these questions and then we'll move on to the next.
Thank you very much. These questions are getting us to get into the data more, to do a lot more analytical work, and that's exactly what we want to do going forward. For some of the issues, I'm going to put them together, especially those who were in vulnerable employment in the third quarter, those who were unemployed in the third quarter and what led them into unemployment in the third quarter. So there was one of the charts that we showed the economic activities of those who were unemployed in the third quarter, and it was evident that in the first quarter they were in vulnerable employment, specifically non-agric without employees and agriculture contributing, and family workers accounting for about 50% of that. So those who were unemployed in the third quarter, from the data point of view, the major issue is the kind of activities that they were doing in the first quarter. The question on 15, 18 years, as I indicated, is strictly a matter of international comparisons. If you want to compare unemployment rates internationally, you use the 15 years cutoff. And also per the labor law, you can go into that. But what I want us to avert our minds to is that the data can always be analyzed to pick up whatever we do. Traditionally, Ghana Statistical Service analyzes child labor from its Living Standard Survey. We're going to do the same going into our 8th round of the Ghana Living Standard Survey. Indeed, we want to have a special model that would help us better understand issues around child labor. And from that, we pick data from as young as 5 years, 7 years, and follow through and see the kind of work that we do, whether we can target as child labor, worst forms of child labor, and so on. So we are very much sensitive to the importance of issues around child labor. Questions came around industrialization, government agenda, and all that. And this is exactly what I said from the onset. The conversation on labor statistics has focused on only unemployment in Ghana. And this is the time that we want the narrative to change so that we can see where people are moving from and to where. With the data that we've presented today, a number of factors could be accounting for the movements that we are doing, which might be independent of what government interventions are. The government intervention might be targeting people who are not doing any kind of work, who are outside the labor force, want to come into the labor force, so the government would want to be targeting that. The government will not be competing with interventions across two sectors, i.e. the planting for food and jobs vis-a-vis the 1D, 1F, to say that which of these two interventions will be attracting people from one area to the other or vice versa. What we've collected here could purely be a seasonality issue, and I emphasize that. We have different seasons in the country. That is why we saw that in the first quarter, the characteristics of labor mobilities was different from that of the second quarter and from the third quarter. Next year, if we follow up with this, we can address the issue of seasonality, and then we would have data and then begin to pick up whether it's government's particular intervention. So we change the narrative on labor statistics and begin to collect data on where does government seek to get people for different interventions. We will not be able to address this. So please, let's keep in mind, especially colleagues from the media, the context in which we put this labor mobility statistics. Let us not jump to say that government 1D, 1F is working, or planting for food and jobs is better than this or otherwise. It's too early in the days, but there's clear evidence that agricultural is a net benefit of about 54,000 people in the first 3 quarters. Services is a net benefit of about 38,000 people in the first. What's the sector that is providing them with all this is the industry sector. So clearly it is called for action so that we follow these people over time. The question on the skills required. Again, that is why I requested the Honorable Deputy Minister that let us not look at this labor statistics report in isolation. The ministry, in collaboration with the service, is going to roll out a qualification and skills mismatch survey. I did also indicate that we have started some interventions in the area of what is work, in the area of what is labor productivity, in the area of earnings inequalities. Until we bring all these things together, it will be too early in the day once again to conclude that we are not equipping people with the requisite skills. There are serious data gaps in terms of what are the skills that are required from the demand side and the supply side. And that is why we are collaborating with the ministry to ensure that we can get that. If we get that, we superimpose it on this, it gives us a better understanding on some basic things. How many doctors do we need? How many economists do we need? How many statisticians do we need? As a country, we are struggling with these basic statistics. And that is why we need to look at all these surveys from a holistic point of view. The question on government interventions, we did not collect data on that, but I think it's a brilliant one. I think your concentration is on whether people were in NAPCO and now they've lost it and so on. Am I correct? Yes, so these are things that moving forward, as I said, we can always augment our questionnaire and collect data on these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Any more contributions?
Okay. My name is Randy from UTV. I'm asking, there are many times that we hear people say Ghanaian youth are lazy. They do not want to work. So I'm asking, from the report, was it captured that there are availability of works or jobs and people do not want to do, or there are not works at all? Thank you.
Please try your mic.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Ekweo Furias-Medu, and I work with the International Labour Organization. I want to add to what the presenter said concerning child labor. ILO has a convention 138, which Ghana has also ratified, and it's a convention on the minimum age for work. According to the ILO convention, one can be employed from age 15, depending on the countries. According to Ghana's labor law also, you can be employed for non-hazardous work from age 15. But if the work is hazardous, it is 18 and above. So if somebody is working at age 15, that is not classified as child labor. Indeed, you can even be, you can enter into work from age 13, and that is light work. You see, if these things are not clarified, it is very difficult for somebody to transition from school to work. And therefore, there is a gradual process of getting the youth into work and therefore into the job. So 13 to 15 is light work. 15 to 17 is an employable age, but non-hazardous. After 18, you can do any work. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the clarification. Yes, please.
When people who are outside employment are joining the agri sector, then we'll be very happy. Then it means that it's working. Because if people are in industry and they're going to the agri sector, then in a way it's not solving the unemployment problem. But if people who are not working are being attracted into the agri sector, then I think that is something that we should be looking at. So that's the first thing. I'm not a journalist. I work at Controller Accountant General. We're invited. But this is a national issue. We are all interested. Sometimes you drive around, you see people who are unemployed, you see them. Some come to you in traffic asking for arms, asking for money. Some of them, you could see clearly that they are not faking it. It's real. They are hungry. You can see people, you can see that when you are coming from lunch to your office in traffic, you can see the hawkers from their faces that they are hungry. They haven't eaten, and it's scary. We roll down, we sit in our air-conditioned cars, and we think we are okay. But it will get to a time, they will pull it out from your car. So it's very important that we look at this, especially with unemployment. Somebody, and as at now, getting to 10, hasn't eaten the whole day. Not that there is food and he doesn't know what to eat, but because the person doesn't have food. Somebody has also eaten now, but he doesn't know where the next meal is coming from. And you see them drinking pure water. You see somebody drinking pure water, and that's what no, the person hasn't eaten, and it's just in Shuna na Onum. Please, it's scary. When I drive, look, sometimes I have a V8 that I use sometimes. And anytime I use the V8 and I have a saloon car, when I use the saloon car, the taxi drivers, the trotro drivers, and the hawkers are friendlier. They are very friendly. When you want to even join a lane, the taxi driver waits and asks you, signal you, join. But anytime I use the V8, oh no, it's you know why? No, anytime I use it, you see how hostile people are. Maybe you haven't, it's scary, but people don't know. You see how hostile people are. There's this mindset. It's all because of hunger. People are not working. I don't think if you are working in any of the banks somewhere, you will worry about what somebody uses. You worry about what somebody's wear, somebody's appearance. You won't worry about that because you know with hard work, you can also make it. But if you're not working, it is that impression that you see can and kufu use. Let's face it. And it's not about politics. It's not politics. But it's because if you don't take time to create a situation where we have the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots, excuse me, might be in the majority. And they will turn against people. It is very important. So I'm not a journalist, but I was asked to represent my boss, but it's something dear to me that anytime, whenever I have a situation, I talk about it. That is what I came myself. Actually, I told my boss that this one, let me attend it, and then let's listen to. When they say unemployment, what is it? And today, at least, we've known what unemployment is all about. If there are people out there, outside, as you said, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, on Jumada, he has finished school, he has finished national service. Please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, please. Please try, yes.
Thank you. Ankara from Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. Thanks, Prof, for the insightful presentation. Really appreciate it. I appreciate your admission that it's early days yet, so we may not be able to as yet establish a certain frequency, which will allow us to make some predictive analysis. I'm saying this because I'm finding out if GSS would at some point consider a model which gives predictive labor statistics, so that maybe instead of waiting for us to know that these are the areas of precarities in the time and the review, we'll be able to look ahead and say, okay, given previous factors that we had and immediate current information that we have, we can predict that in the coming year or in the coming next couple of years, these are the precarities we are likely to encounter, and what policy interventions may be recommended to deal with them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Please, I'm Nana Kujopon from TV Africa, and my question is on the vulnerably employed perspective, where women have actually dominated that sector. I just wanted to ask about the contributing factor that has brought about that. Could it be about the fact that it's about women having a higher population rate, or probably there could be a social factor? Because day in and day out, we hear of social or government initiatives or policies that actually stem women empowerment. So I just wanted to find out about such a factor.
Please try your mic.
Thank you very much. Winston of Metro TV. I've still not heard about the income part or the income portion of the presentation. That is how much the individuals who have moved from industry to service or trade, how much they get or receive in terms of income per month or wages per week. If I could please get the employment minister to kindly respond to that, I'll be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Before Prof addresses these concerns, there are some messages online, and I would like to read them. Question 1. Can you say more about the fact that a quarter of those outside the labor force are working but not employed? What would be your guess as to what is happening with this group? Question 2. From Maxwell Hobisei. 2/3 of persons who were employed from the vulnerable employment. Can the findings go deeper to know what is leading to that? Are they abused or what? Then another question from John Frederick. A suggestion, actually. I will suggest this number calls for industrialization leading to jobs opportunities. This will lead to less crime and youth engagement. Prof, please.
Thank you very much. So let me start with the first one. did not collect data on attitudinal issues, data on behavioral issues, which would warrant us to get into a conversation on whether indeed the youth in Ghana are lazy or not. So that exercise was not done. The other questions that came up would go back to emphasize what I indicated earlier. We've barely scratched the potential of the data that we have. The data is extremely resourceful, and it can do the predictive concerns that you want us to do. Once we have some data over time and we have all the needed variables, we can do that. And I'll come back to that, why Ghana Statistical Service will be hesitant and would approach it in a different way. And this also relates to the question on what is really accounting for more females being in vulnerable employment. So again, what we've just done is to give you the descriptive statistics. I would put my head out and say that it goes beyond just because they are females. And the reason why I say that is the percentage point difference of 21 percentage point between males and females is striking. So it's important to look at other factors that might be contributing to what is leading to having more females in vulnerable employment. And we have all the needed variables that would help us do the kind of analysis that we would have to do. Coming back to these kinds of analysis, per our mandate as the provider of official statistics, we are very circumspect in doing forecasting and predictive analysis, or any analysis that will lend to controlling for some element of error and say that once you accommodate for this element of error, then this is what the case is. The reason being that once you do that, you are likely to be biased towards when you need to put out the real data. So to do this, we are approaching this from two perspectives. We want to work closely with the ministries. So in this particular case, we would want the ministry to lead this process, get GSS as a technical person on board, provide all the needed data, the disaggregations, and then we'll provide guidance on how the modeling should be done for the predictive analysis to go on. Another route that we are approaching this, because we think work in the public space has been limited to only data production. So now we have our new public policy unit that will not be putting out official statistics. So they're going to put out statistics in a working paper series environment to say that this is work in progress. The ministries can take this up and see how they can firm it up to inform their setting of statistical targets going forward. But we would end at the point of a working paper series so that it is not used as an official statistic. So once we are putting out an official statistic, it's based on real data that we've collected. It's not based on controlling for any element of error. It is not a predictive analysis. It is indeed what has been certified as what is pertaining on the ground. And that is what GSS we are doing. There was a question on earnings. It's definitely not the focus of this presentation. But those of you who followed through the first presentation, we had earnings data. We put out the mean hourly earnings across different demographics. The data is there. Going forward in our main report, we're going to do that. And again, that is why I prompted the earlier work on earnings inequality. Because when we released the earnings inequality, we said that is coming from the public sector point of view, and the annual household income and expenditure survey is going to augment it by giving us data from both the public and the private sector. So we're going to analyze all that, and we're going to have information on earnings across the different sectors. The question on work but not employed is something that we need to pay attention to, because it gives us a better understanding of why we have people who are outside the labor force. So once we have drafted a questionnaire and we get people who are not working and people that we want to get more information on, we ask questions on reasons why you are not available for work, for instance. Reason why you are not seeking for work, for instance. To get an understanding of why you are not either employed or unemployed, for which reason you are outside the labor force. So those outside the labor force, one of the categories that we found out is people who worked but not employed, which simply means that they did either something for themselves, they worked on their farm, They worked in their own industry. But they did not do it for purposes of attracting pay or profit. They did it for somebody and they did not attract any pay or profit. So that is the distinction between work but not employed and those who were employed, based on the definition that we got earlier on. But definitely this is an area that I'm pretty certain the United Nations Development Program would want to pick up strongly to understand issues around work vis-a-vis unemployment and employment. Have I done justice to all the questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take our last set of questions and then... Yes, sir. Please try.
Yeah, thank you, Prof, for the presentation. My name is Daniel. I'm coming from NAT, Ghana National Association of Teachers. My first issue is that I want to know whether those who dropped out of the labor market falling, is it the reason that the government doesn't have the capacity to employ, or their skills, they have tested and realized that they don't have the required basic skills to fill the schools and teach the students? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof, and good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Olatunji Shonoiki from the World Food Program, and just one question is, how can we use, what is the possibility of using this data that is very rich for targeting? For government interventions, because when we're talking about unemployment, these are real people with real problems, and the government have a lot of developmental efforts in place, both to promote employment, women empowerment, and even social protection interventions. So is there a possibility to link this data to inform programmatic decisions, especially as it relates to targeting? And related to that are issues around the typology of the people that are unemployed. Do we know who they are? Are there disabled people there? Because then that could stimulate further discussions.
Found in your analysis, and how do we relate to that? There's a point also about, I'm still struggling what to do or what to make of the data. One, I get a sense about deindustrialization at a point, or maybe too conclusive to make, but it's a bit weird in terms of the patterns, that the expectation is that people move from agric to industry, industry to service. But what is this pattern where there's this oscillation between people moving back to agric and even moving away from industry, sort of? What accounts for these sort of things? What is peculiar about the Ghanaian economy is the fact that there's defined logic in this sort of process. So maybe a little bit on that. And finally, maybe you might give us a little tease about what exactly were happening in the quarters you are capturing, because you're giving us quarterly predictions. Your quarters start from where to when, and what could be the peculiarities in the quarters that could explain the patterns you are picking up in the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Prof, please, I want to find out from you, with the report you just released, is it possible that 2030 the government can achieve sustainable development goal? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. My name is Adam Kojo. I work with the EIB network, Star FM. Prof, respectfully, in your presentation, you disclosed that out of the 11 million people that are employed at any given time, it's just 7.5 that have what you said, consistent jobs, or who have had jobs consistently. Also, you've said that 2 out of 3 persons are in vulnerable employment. I want to understand, when it comes to the 7.5 per se, doesn't mean that they have a permanent job of some sort, or we have the instance where they move from one sector to another. So maybe the person is in the industry, along the line, in 3 months, he moves to another sector and moves back. I want to understand, is it a permanent job of the 7.5 people, or we have them oscillating between some vulnerable jobs? Thank you.
We'll take our last question.
All right, so I'm Michael Kusi up here from National Development Planning Commission. I would like to know whether, Prof, we did look at those who also have multiple jobs or additional jobs in addition to our questionnaires.
Once again, thank you very much for those questions. And permit me to emphasize again, it's exposing us to further analysis that we can do with the data that we have, and at the same time, seeking the different kinds of analysis that would help us maximize the returns that we all need from this data that we've collected. 3 questions were asked, but I'll start with the third of the first question, which has to do with government targeting. And the reason why I'm doing that is, colleague from WFP, is to sort of get us to know expectations from GSS and how we want to work with different stakeholders, i.e. policymakers and development partners. We collect the data simply for targeting purposes. That is the primary goal. That is why we are in this business of consistently providing government with data. We are equally minded of the fact that we cannot take you to a particular person and tell you that this is the person that needs these interventions and that. But we can always point you to an area that have characteristics or groups of people that have characteristics which would easily enable you do the targeting that you want to do. So like the questions that you asked, the vulnerable employment, what their characteristics are, we don't want to have a huge report out there that tries to analyze everything. But then from that data, we can find out of the 11 million people, how many of them have A, B, C, D characteristics, where they are, and so on and so forth, to point you to how you need to do the targeting. So although we're not going to divulge the private information, we're going to keep it confidential, we are aiming at disaggregating. That is why now, a lot of our analysis, we are going below the regional level. Hitherto, we end at the regional level, and it doesn't really help. But now we are even prepared to do district-level analysis and locality-level analysis to help policymakers and development partners do the right targeting. With a collection of GPS coordinates, that analysis is pretty straightforward. We don't necessarily have to do it with the name of a district or the name of a locality, but we can point you to different geographical spaces, small enough to enable you do the targeting that you require. So please, our doors are open for detailed analysis in this area. Coming back to the first question on the work conditions, we didn't collect data on it. As I indicated, we have started this conversation on changing the narrative only from the third quarter point of view. But definitely with the things that we are seeing now, is giving us reasons to find out or program data collection tablet in such a way that if somebody has moved from one job to another, we notice it in the field and not when we get back to the office. So with all these things, we're not privy to them while we're in the field, to enable us to identify why did you move from industry to agri to industry, and so on and so forth. But with this revelation and the response that we are getting going forward, we can definitely program our tool to enable us collect the needed data. There was a question on the feminine nature of employment and unemployment in Ghana, and also the characteristics of our quarterly data. So one of the highlights that we put out there is that unemployment among females is close to twice that of males. It's in the report. Unemployment among females is close to about twice that of males. And we've said it categorically from the vulnerable employment point of view. You see about a 21 percentage point difference between males and females. So the gender divide with our employment characteristics, our labor characteristics, is pretty straightforward in terms of both from an unemployment point of view and from a vulnerable employment point of view. I do agree with you. It's always important to look out for underemployment in any labor statistics report. The emphasis here is to get people in Ghana to talk about labor mobilities. The annual household income and expenditure survey will come up with its own report, and it's going to do all the analysis that we want to have, including underemployment, which is consistent with what we've been doing with our previous releases. In terms of the sectoral movements, I'm going to emphasize what I said earlier on. So if you look at what we have here, we collected the first quarter data from 1st January to 12 April, second quarter data from 4th April to 22nd July, and third quarter data from 23rd July to 2nd November. It is for this reason why I raised the issues of seasonalities. You cannot talk about quarterly labor statistics without trying to address seasonality after some time. And you can only address seasonality if you have at least 2 or 3 data points over 2 or 3 years. We started this in 2022. So how the movements were affected by our rainfall seasons, different government interventions, will not be explained by this. But why we want to start this conversation is that for whatever development plan that we're going to put up going forward, which is missing in the current one, labor mobility should be part of it. That is why we are starting the conversation now. So clearly, there are a number of factors that are affecting the statistics that we are doing. But after the second year, with 8 points of quarterly data, we can adjust for seasonality and see the extent to which seasonality is affecting that. But we are still mindful that the differences that we are seeing are pretty significant enough to call for government attention. There was a question on whether SDGs can be reached by 2030. And let me commend the questioner for putting that up. It's one of the things that we are pushing for as Statistical Service, because over the years, we keep on talking about the number of the SDGs indicators that we are tracking. We have about 231 SDGs. Currently, we are tracking about 129 of them. And from our point of view as management of Statistical Service, that is not what we are interested in. What we are interested in is we are just 7 years or so to 2030. If you are tracking it, does it mean you'll be able to reach it? This is something that GSS cannot do. This is something that GSS, again, would have to do in collaboration with the implementing ministries, departments, and agencies, because they have a clear sense of what their targets are, what they are going to do in the next 2 years to give an indication of whether the SDGs can be achieved or not. But if you look at SDG 8, which talks about decent work for all, and if you are defining it from the vulnerable employment point of view, and as I said, if 2013 we still had 2 out of every 3 people in vulnerable employment, and the situation has not changed in 2023, we need a different kind of intervention to see a change between 2023 and 2030. So in our discussions with academic institutions, the kind of collaboration that we want them to do is predicting the extent to which Ghana can meet the SDGs, at least the SDGs that we are tracking and for which we have data. But we are hoping that we strengthen the relationship to collect the needed data. There was a question on the vulnerabilities, and I'm going to explain it again so that we get a better appreciation of what we are talking about. So we are looking at vulnerabilities from 2 perspectives. One is people who are moving in and out of economic status. So the 7.5 million, the 11 million, all that we are saying is that if for each quarter, that is using a single data point, you find 11 million people in employment, but you want to find out those who have consistently stayed in employment, and you have 7.5 million. What that tells you is that 3.5 million people are moving in and out of economic status. So one definition of vulnerability is the movement in and out. Another definition of vulnerability is the security around your work. So the kind of work that you do you have a contract? Do you have a pension? Are you entitled to leave? And so on and so forth. The way we capture that is the categories of people who are self-employed without any employees and those who are contributing family workers. So that is the second category of the definition of vulnerable employment. From the second category, what we've seen here is that 2/3 of people who say they are employed are in vulnerable employment. And from a movement point of view, we've identified 3.5 million people who are employed but move in and out of economic status. And from the different analysis, you saw how they move from employed, outside the labor force, and unemployed, and so on. So we need to treat these as two separate characteristics and have different policy interventions for them, because they would not demand the same policy intervention. The characterization are different. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. At this point, I would call on Madam Josephine Jassi to launch the report for us with the help from those on the high table.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be called upon to launch this very, very important report from the GSS. I am very happy about the conversation that this has generated, the presentation has generated, and it is my hope that the conversations will not end here and that it will continue, and the GSS also will ensure that the important points that have been raised here will be factored going forward, and that these reports, as the GSS has indicated, this is something that is ongoing and will continue. But it is our hope that it will indeed serve the purpose for which, it's being launched. That is helping policy makers in Ghana with and supporting them with quality data. And on that note, on behalf of GSS board, management, and staff, I declare the third quarter 2022 labor force report of the Ghana Annual Household Income and Expenditure Survey duly launched. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. So, would invite Honorable Bright Rekubrobe to give us his closing remarks.
Yes. Professor and team, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am glad that this report has generated and provoked certain questions and areas which the GSS had not even averted their minds. While sitting there, Prof, I was thinking of this. In the last 7 years, the numbers of pupils and students, because of PSHS, has really doubled. So in times past, you have people complete JHS and straight into the job market. Now they complete JHS, they have 3 more years, whether they will even continue to the university or they get into the market, the labor market. is something that I've been thinking of. So you could start looking at that, so that this rate of, especially the NEET, those in education, those in employment, and those under training, let's see how we can reconcile this, and then we can make a case out of that. Ladies and gentlemen, one key thing Prof said was a narrative. In fact, when we leave here, this session has been quite technical. Apart from the controller man who spoke about the social dimension of this engagement, if we leave here, probably there will be two things: the employment rate and unemployment. And that's what you want us to shy away from. It will be very difficult. So next time, probably, Prof, get us some key takeaways, which we can, when we leave here, what did you go to do? I'm telling you, Prof, if you don't take care, people cannot narrate what they have come to hear.
Is it true?
And it will not inure to the good of anybody. But for me, what I have seen, this report will guide we the policymakers, so that we are able to do things. We put square pegs in square holes and round pegs in round holes. Another thing I would like to end with is also the narrative about the jobs in Ghana. Many times, if people are in certain jobs, they don't see that as jobs. If they are not in tie and coat, they always think they are unemployed. But from your own statistics, over 80% of Ghanaians are working in the informal sector, where you don't necessarily need tie to be doing your job. So the narrative around the informal sector jobs should also be encouraged, because they have built Ghana. It's these people that have built Ghana. Unfortunately, somebody's parents will be doing chop bar somewhere. That's what they have done all the years and taking their 7 children to universities. None of them is interested in coming back to even support the parents, because of the nature of the narrative. We in the employment ministry, this is one thing we have seen. That people think that jobs are those in the local government service, MPA, BOST, the security services. But the people on controller payroll, about 650,000. And you are talking of 11 million people who are working. Controller payroll is less than 1 million. Yet people think that those are the jobs. So the narrative should also look at some of these things. On this note, ladies and gentlemen, my function as a chairman, you have helped me. We've achieved it. The report has been launched. Let's hope and pray that we digest it, and then policymakers will also make good out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I believe we all have the pen drives distributed. It contains the report and other census documents as well for our consumption. And today we've learned that when we hear of labor, we shouldn't just think about employment rate and unemployment rate. We should look at the mobilities, the securities, and the vulnerabilities as well, and move away from the narrative where we always look at, oh, this number of persons are unemployed or employed. You agree with me that today has been quite successful, and it is with your cooperation and your help. And for that, we would say a big thank you for joining us and honoring our invitation. To dismiss us, we'll call on Mohammed Abdullahi to commit us to God's hands and to take us to our various offices and to our various businesses. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the best, good things that you've done for us. Before we started this program, we asked for your blessings and mercy and for a successful program. And we are glad and we appreciate that God was able to control the program for us. The MC was able to do her best. Our professor and all those that were called upon to talk to us were able to deliver successfully. We thank God for that. And we also thank God for giving our government statistician and his team to give us this wonderful report. And we pray that all the policy people that will have to use this data should be able to use it successfully, so that the long run Ghana will be successful and will have good and will benefit from that report. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. La ta'khuzuhu sinatun wa la nawm. Lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. Man dhal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi'iznihi. يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يعوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Amen. Thank you so much and have a blessed afternoon. Thank you.
Chair, thank you so much. Thank you.
Why are there?
No, but no.